It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I recently received an email from Mike Cohn, and the email was talking about how long should a team stay together. And I'm going to read part of the email to you, and then I'm going to give you my feedback and thoughts on it. What I can tell you is I have a 99% chance of certainty, a 99% level of confidence that Mike and I are going to be on the same page with this one. So here we go. We've come to the end of our series. He did a letter series about Scrum teams, but I can't move on without talking about the concept of long-lived Scrum teams. And without mentioning March Madness one more time, he has a big affection for March Madness. I'm not quite the basketball guy, but I get where he's coming from. The question I get asked almost every class is how long should an Agile team stay together? Some orgs change team composition every sprint. Others try to move team members around so often to get fresh ideas or to avoid groupthink, and that makes sense. If you've ever heard of Bruce Tuckman's model, the Tuckman model, forming, storming, norming, performing, the main takeaway from Tuckman's model is that team members who have worked together previously will outperform team members who have not. And that just makes sense, right? What this means is that an agile team can benefit from consistency. I'll tell you that right now, it makes total sense. The only exception that I have to this rule is an exception around culture. And please allow me to explain what I mean by that. I've seen times where we've kept teams together for the sake of keeping teams together when someone just wasn't a good cultural match or fit for the team. Now, that doesn't mean that disband a team altogether and start over, but sometimes you hear the term self organizing or self managing or self aligning. And I thoroughly believe that once teams have a certain level of maturity, that's an important piece here. Once they have a certain level of maturity, that they should have an opportunity to self regulate or move around a little bit if they need to. But let's see where Mike takes this. He says, I think the sport of basketball can offer a lesson in this regard. The United States National Basketball Playoffs, aka March Madness, begin just next. Is it really next week? I guess it is. I don't always catch every playoff game, but I rarely miss the post game highlights. My favorites are all the alley oop dunks, where one player passes the ball not to another player, but to a spot where that player will be. That only works when players are totally in sync and not Backstreet Boys. He didn't put Backstreet Boys in there, I did. Each player has to know what the other is going to do. Otherwise, it looks like an errant wild pass thrown to no one. But by this time of year, two teammates have played together long enough for so many months that they've established that connectedness. It's much more rare to see at the beginning of the season when teammates are just getting used to one another than it is to see these fantastic dunks later in the season. And I think I see where he's going with this. There's the same kind of chemistry in football. And I am an NFL football fan. My team is the New Orleans Saints, and they just recently got Derek Carr, and I'm excited about it. But I think that there's going to be some chemistry that has to happen between a new quarterback and a team members for all the different timing routes, for all the different no-look passes. There's certain elements of professional sports or college level sports where you just have to have timing down. So back to the question. So with all this consideration, how long should an agile team stay together? I'd like to think a team should stay together largely unchanged for at least 2 to 3 months, if not longer. That gives team members the opportunity to really become synchronized as great basketball players are by season's end. Let me pause there for a minute. I actually believe that as long as the team is in a state where they're delivering products and services frequently, they have mechanisms in place for cross pollination and cross training. They are T shaped teams, and we have some T shaped individuals who are building out from those teams. Then I think it should be longer. Let's see what he says. He says, what about longer? There is merit in that too. In sports, we often see the same teams rising in the top ranks each year, specifically when those teams have many of the same players that return to play another year for a university, for example. It's not just the repeat teams that have great talent, they also have great experience working as a unit. Now, one testament of that is I've actually seen teams where I don't want to celebrate mediocrity, but I've seen teams where their behavior wasn't necessarily, how should I put it? They weren't all superstars. And at the beginning of a season, one might even say that they were just barely getting by or mediocrity existed. But over time, the team got to know each other better. And by the end of a season, they were just clicking and things were working really well. And a lot of times I call them the team of misfit toys, right? Because it wasn't ever intended for them to have extreme success, but oftentimes they do. And I think that if you take that into consideration, I think this is no different. Teams should stay together longer if they can. Studies of surgeons and financial advisors have shown that high performing individuals do their best when they're allowed to remain part of a stable team. So when you're tempted to start moving people around from team to team, pause and consider whether or not the upside is worth it. The forces of nature, new hires, departed employees, changes to promote, cross training, and so on, mix up the team membership every so often without interjecting unnecessary change. Sounds like it makes sense, but keeping a team together as long as possible makes even more sense. And what I can tell you is I appreciate Mike's take on this because he's right. We have to have mechanisms in place for all those things, but we also need to make certain that we're giving the team the opportunity to work together for as long as they can. And I think that if you situate the team and put them in a position for success, it's going to be a lot easier. So, a couple of things you need to be put in a position for success. Item number one that you need, we want to make sure that the team has a good team working agreement, that they understand who each other are, that they have a sort of established, I guess that's going to lead me to number two, that they have an established culture, that they know how they work together, they understand different components of how they're going to engage and at what level they're going to communicate and how they communicate. And I think that these things are incredibly important because these are the things that drive the team to be successful. And then finally, I think if you put the sugar on top, number three is you want teams that are self-organized, self-disciplined, and self-aware. They're aware of each other's skill sets. They're aware of places where they have gaps. They're aware that their goal is to become T-shaped and cross-functional. They build in story points and time needed for them to really shine and become top performers. Because the truth is, if you have a team that has season, it's kind of like, and I'm going to make my own comparison. It's kind of like a chef with a special pan. If you've got a pan or a cooker and a popcorn machine and it's seasoned well, your popcorn's always going to be good. That food's always going to taste better. Nothing cooks better than food or steak in a seasoned pan. All right, that's going to do it. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, feel free to reach out to us. Learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.